AP World History. All right, we are going to make a run at not the rest of the notes for Unit 6. I'm going to leave a little bit left over, just kind of like a little concluding section that wraps it all up. But we are going to make a mighty run here at the rest of it. See how close I can keep it, between 30 to 40 minutes. Yeah, I said 40. But a lot of territory I'm going to try to cover. And starting with the fact that I actually have to, again, those of you in sixth period, you're going to fast forward a little bit, right? Unless you felt like you didn't get very good notes the first time, because we covered everything except for Africa in seventh period, and so that's where I'm going to get things going here, and get us some information about that. Okay, so like I said, making this kind of specifically for them. So when we talk about Africa and this idea of food crops to cash crops. That concept of cash crops that we've talked about, I think we've talked about. If we haven't, it's that idea that the crops that you are growing are not for feeding people; they are for business. They are to make money. Okay, whatever it is that might be being raised on a farm, on a plantation, is being done strictly because it can be harvested and sold, and a lot of times meaning as in being usually using trains to get it out to ports, and then from the ports loaded onto ships and sent back up to Europe. Okay, not being used. So we can think of some things like, Egypt is in Africa, and so the cotton trade, cotton is a cash crop. Okay, you're not going to turn around, the people aren't going to be eating it. All right. Some of the results of the heavy reliance on this, I'll go on here. There we go. Consequences, some of them you can back up to D and kind of take a look at that. But another very, very specific one is that in parts of Africa, we're going to see actual food shortages because they're being forced to work on these farms and plantations, planting, tending to, raising and then harvesting cash crops. And in some of those colonies, you actually end up with a lack of food to feed the labor force, the indigenous people who are in there. And so that's who's going to end up dealing with the impact of that, are going to be the indigenous populations. All right. Slave labor. You're still going to be seeing forms of slavery being used in those African colonies. Not, most of these European countries that are operating these colonies, especially by the end of the 19th century, they're not going to call it slavery. All right. They're going to come up with all kinds of euphemisms and other names for it, because slavery had basically been outlawed. And most of those European countries had signed on to international laws. No more international slave trade, so no more slave ships coming out of Africa, those kinds of things. But at the same time, they are still exploiting the indigenous populations and forcing them to work. Think like we talked about with the Dutch, with corvée labor. You this option or you got that one. Either way you pick, bottom line, you're being forced to work against your will. Okay, with the promise of punishment if you don't. And so you've got that going on. Now you will see some slavery still existing also in Africa, because there's still going to be some African tribes and cultural groups, sometimes even within the colony setup, that are still warring with each other and taking prisoners as slaves. Okay, kind of like there was working, in the days when the African slave trade was working, pretty much at full steam. So, again, you're gonna have a lot of Europeans saying, "Oh, no, there's no slaves here anymore. Slavery's outlawed." Remember, but on the ground, in reality, no. It is slave-like conditions that are still going on. All right. And then going back up to what I was talking about, those consequences with cash crops, some of the prohibitions, some of the laws that are passed to basically control the indigenous population. One of the cruelest that was practiced in a number of the European colonies was the prohibition that Africans were not allowed to grow their own crops. Basically, the Europeans telling them, "We will supply you with the foodstuffs you need, for sustenance, for survival. But any agricultural work you are doing is for us. It is for making, for us to make money. It is for profit." And so, just an example of the kinds of laws that could be passed in some of those colonies to guarantee profitability on the colonizer side, and to control the indigenous population. All right, moving it over to Latin America. Let's start off here. In 1823, James Monroe, U.S. president at the time, uh, basically announces his doctrine, okay, what we refer to as the Monroe Doctrine. And basically, this was a message that he aimed to Europe. Your imperialism is already starting to pop up here and there, and the United States did not want to see Europeans coming over and colonizing Central South America, the Caribbean, that kind of thing. And so the Monroe Doctrine pretty much just said to Europe, hands off the Western Hemisphere. Okay, you cannot come here and colonize, and if you colonize, you're going to be dealing with the United States, which wasn't a real heavy threat in 1823. We're still not really all that strong, but I don't know. By then, War of 1812, we're kind of showing our oats a bit, and it was a law that the Europeans, by and large, were going to respect. They weren't going to come in and try to establish, full-on colonies like you see going on in parts of Asia and in Africa and Australia. Instead, they're going to use what's called economic colonialism, all right? And really what we're talking about there is they're going to set up businesses. That is not a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. We're not sending in troops, but maybe there's a British company or a French company that wants to set up shop in a Central American country, a South American country. And they're pretty much saying, hey, if you come and work for us, we'll be able to give jobs to some of the local people, the indigenous population. You make some money, we make some money, everybody is happy. All right. Which sounds kind of awesome at the beginning, but is going to have some really, really negative results because this will happen. All right. First of all, Europeans are going to. Matter of fact, the United States eventually starts setting up businesses in Central and South America. But what ends up happening is the governments of those countries start getting really cozy with the businesses. The businesses pretty much asking for special favors of the government in order to maintain their business. You need to back off work regulations. Let us kind of do our own thing here. If you don't, we might have to close up shop and go somewhere else. There's always that threat hanging over that we will take our business elsewhere. We'll set up a factory in somewhere in Asia, and you guys can just go without. And so, the governments of these Central South American Caribbean countries, they basically play ball with these European countries, and eventually even with the United States. Don't leave. We'll work with you. That kind of an idea. And so, going into the early 20th century, when the United States Fruit Company begins to establish this network of businesses through Central America, the influence they have on the governments of those Central American countries is where we get the concept of banana republics. Okay, before it was a store at the mall, it was this concept of just the influence and the interest and the connections between these foreign businesses and the governments. And pretty soon, these foreign businesses are almost acting like a proxy government in a way. They're able to pretty much tell the governments what to do and what not to do, because they're always hanging that threat of the withdrawal of business and the money that is made in those countries from that business, the jobs that are provided in those countries by those businesses. And so it's kind of a real, kind of an innocuous but a sneaky way of still almost in a way, you're still practicing imperialism, you're still practicing colonialism in a way, but it's very different, but it has the same effect where people really aren't, truly free. Okay. And then I'll finish that up with an example of the United States annexing Hawaii in 1898. Hawaii had been kind of an independent kingdom, kind of ruled by their own monarchs and that kind of a thing. The United States sees a real high value in Hawaii because of fruit and sugar industry in there. And we that's kind of where we started, is with opening businesses like Dole in Hawaii, and then beginning to exert more and more influence to where eventually we basically overthrow the monarchy and make Hawaii a territory of the United States. Just pretty boom, de facto, it's ours. And then that sets them down the road, about 60 years later, adding it to the, making it a state, where we are now. So it follows that same path, okay, of economic colonialism or economic imperialism. I think you can pretty much play it either way. All right, migration. We're shifting gears. Another section here, section 6, migration and imperialism. Let me get some stuff up here for you. So labor systems that are being used. So migration, the idea that we're going to have people moving a lot during this era of imperialism. And some of them are going to be, the Europeans, the imperializers, but sometimes it's going to be the imperialized that is also, okay? And, one of the things that is allowing this to happen at a higher and more accelerated rate is the dramatic improvements in transportation technology because of the Industrial Revolution. Now we have steamships and, we have railroads that will be built. And these are going to be transporting not only the goods, but also people. Okay. And so that's kind of where this section focuses in on. All right. And so what we're going to see is a lot of these, some of them countries that are colonized and some of them are countries that are not. But we are going to see this massive movement of people going to where they see job opportunities. Okay, so this movement of laborers from place to place. India, which will be under British control, will be kind of unique in that a lot of times what they're doing is, they're taking their laborers, Indian people themselves, and they are sending them to their other colonies that they have in other places in the world. So, if the British are feeling like they've got work projects going on, say in South Africa or Fiji, and they're not getting done at the rate, the level, the speed they want them, then they won't think twice about bringing shiploads of laborers from India, their other colony, to help make improvements on, a completely separate colony. And so, they're using their own colonists to kind of just improve and expand on the empire. Okay, those Indian laborers that go there, and I can throw up some other examples here too. You have Chinese. Now they're not imperialized, and so these are Chinese that are just looking for opportunity, getting away from poverty, getting away from just kind of really, really super low wage, subsistence farming, that kind of thing. They're looking for opportunity. So places like Malaya, in California, during the gold rush, you're going to have Chinese laborers showing up in those places. And then Japanese laborers, another example, country that's not colonized or imperialized, but also people who are looking for opportunities to make money, okay? Most of what you're looking there with 1, 2, 3, the people who leave home to go look for these jobs usually don't find exactly what they're looking for. I mean, they'll find work, but a lot of times it's low-wage labor. Any of them that are leaving, Chinese who go to California, think if they get rich at gold rush, they don't do much better than most of the Americans go to California for the gold rush. Most of them end up broke. And many of the other Chinese that go to California actually, like you see in the photograph over there, very quickly are going to give up on the gold search, and they're going to take advantage of the railroad building that is going on in the United States, especially when the race is on to build the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s after the Civil War. Chinese will play a really instrumental role in helping to build those railroads in the United States and really establish that railroad network in the U.S. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Come on, there we go. All right, some labor systems that we can talk about here. So when we talk about the kind of work that these laborers, these migrant laborers are going to be doing, first of all, slavery, well, like we talked about just in the prior section, I mean, it's abolished by the 19th century. Some countries faster than others. Our own country, the United States, is one of the last to give up slavery. I think Brazil may be the very last one. I think they finally abolished slavery in the 1880s. So we're going to be looking for other labor systems to put these migrant laborers to work. Indentured servitude, which we've learned about already in here, will make a reappearance in Unit 6. And this idea of working for a specified amount of time and then boom, you're freed. Okay. We also have the idea of what were called contract laborers. And these are going to be a lot of what you see up there above 1, 2, 3. Those Indian, Chinese, and Japanese, they're going to end up being contract laborers. Sometimes they're lured under the promise that hey, no, this is going to be a great opportunity for you. But yeah. A lot of times, like I said, low wage. Some of those are almost. I mean, they're just barely skidding the thin line between free labor and slavery. So contract laboring, not necessarily the way that you want to go, but it is one of the other labor systems that is in place. The last labor system I'll talk about is the penal colony system, and we've talked a little bit about this already. The British, who established in the early days, established a penal colony in Georgia, in North America, but then boom, they lose that with the Revolution. They will establish a much larger one in Australia, and we've talked about already. A lot of these are convicts that are coming from England. They're coming from Scotland. They're coming from Ireland. Some of them are coming from the poorhouses of England. That kind of a thing. People who either have been convicted or are in arrears. They can't pay their bills. Those are the kind of people that end up in Australia. Most of them are put to work. Infrastructure projects, building roads. Some of them that have maybe a little bit more education, helping to administer the colony, that sort of thing. Okay, the French, they do a little bit of the same. They, matter of fact, when I think about penal colonies for the French, the one that quickly comes to mind for me is called Devil's Island, which was kind of like a prison slash. Definitely putting the penal in colony. It was in French Guiana, and a notorious prison for just how tough the conditions were. I think if you dig up the movie Papillon, I think it's about Devil's Island, which is an old version and a little bit of a newer remake of it that was came out here in the last few years. All right. Anyhow, that gives you some examples of 4 different kind of labor systems that are operating. All right. Let's see, migration and challenges. Okay, so some of the migration that's going to be going on will have very thin connection to actual imperialism, and it's going to have more to do with migration and people leaving countries looking for opportunity because there are challenges going on in their home country. There are issues happening, and they need, these are people who feel like they need to get out almost in order to survive. Okay. And so we'll look at some examples of that. Let's see, in India and China, with India, even under British control. Some of this is before British control, some of this is after. India is always going to be a country that is going to struggle with poverty. Even under British control, there's going to still be poverty. And so some of it's going to be that. Some of that is going to be the challenge of the British trying to manage, again, a large empire. And so sometimes sending Indians to their other colonies to do work. Okay, with China, it does have much more to do so with poverty and Chinese who are seeking opportunities elsewhere. Some Chinese end up in Australia. Some of them end up in Canada. And then I mentioned you already that a number of Chinese end up immigrating to the United States, first to California, and then working that transcontinental railroad. Ireland, and then we'll look at Italy. Ireland, there's going to be a massive exodus out of Ireland in the 1830s, 1840s, in large part because by the time you get to that time in history, the Irish, their staple food is potatoes. Okay, there's a little Columbian Exchange connection right there, because before the Columbian Exchange, there were no potatoes in Ireland. Okay, no snakes, no potatoes, and this is, by the way, this is our, we're kind of foreshadowing St. Patrick's Day coming here in a week. Anyhow, that they end up with what they call the potato blight. It's a disease that attacks the potato crop in Ireland, and they end up with what is known as the potato famine, and people starving to death. And even though Ireland was pretty much under the control of the British by then, the British seem unlikely, like they're not going to do anything to help. And so literally millions of Irish find a way to get out of the country. A lot of them will end up here in the United States. This is where we see a huge push in Irish immigration in the United States. It's going to be 1830s, 1840s. So trying to get away from poverty in Ireland, trying to get away from that famine that's going on, right? Italy will be very, very similar, very, very poverty based. This is about the time of the unification of Italy, but there's a lot of political chaos. Some people want to get out from there. You have organized crime that has the mafia has pretty much full control of southern Italy. Some people want to get out for that reason, but most of them that get out is specifically to get away from poverty and try to look for a better life. A lot of the Italians end up also in the United States, particularly in the late part of the 19th century, and a lot of Italians also end up in South America, particularly Argentina. I think we'll come back and we'll get back on that here in a minute. Okay, all right. We also have occurring during this time what are known as settler colonies. And this is the idea, and we see this a bit, when we think about imperialism in the United States with westward movement, manifest destiny, Americans pushing westward and displacing Native Americans. The idea was, we want the indigenous people to, in a manner of speaking, disappear. Because we want what they have. We want their land. We want to be able to develop it and do our own thing with it. We see that in our country. In Australia, the same thing happens with the Aboriginal people in there. The idea is, shove these people to somewhere, on the perimeter, somewhere out of the way, where we can do our own thing. And when we have that kind of be one of the motivators for why people are flooding into an area, why we have kind of that form of imperialism happening, that's where we refer to what they're establishing are settler colonies. Okay, they want the land because they see the value in it and the potential for profit and that sort of thing. But there's this concept, this idea that there's people there already, and you need to move them out, whether it's putting them on reservations, whether it's chasing them up into the hills and parts of the country that the rest of the population, whether it's the Europeans, whether it's American settlers, land that they wouldn't want anyway. That's where you put the indigenous people. That kind of a concept. All right. Oh, it's like I forgot to do a little animating here. Gee, hopefully it's just this slide. And then the people who migrate into these areas, and particularly when we're talking not so much about the United States here, but when we're talking about a lot of these European colonies, the reasons they are going, sometimes it's voluntary, sometimes they're ordered to go. Okay, soldiers by and large, whether it's a British soldier over there on the left, whether the soldiers of any of these colonizing countries, typically, to them it's just another day on the job. They just happen to be being sent to Africa or being sent to Asia, wherever it might be, and they're being sent there typically to help to manage and control and sometimes almost play referee between settlers and indigenous people. Okay, so that is one reason why one of the roles that some of these settlers are going to show up in is in uniform and they're to do their thing. Okay. And by the way, most of these settlers who are migrating, especially when we talk about soldiers and government officials, a lot of these it's temporary. They don't plan on staying here. Again, it's part of the job. And these soldiers know, once they've got things under control, they're probably going to be loaded back on ships and probably sent to another colony somewhere else that's having some kind of problems, and be stepping in to deal with that. Government officials, they typically are ordered. Okay, this is part of what in England and some of the other countries they refer to it. They call it the colonial service. It's a part of the government, and they have officials who go through specialized training so that they can then go off to these far-flung colonies on the edges of the empire and run them. Okay, to be able to, again, kind of like the soldiers, play referee sometimes between the demands of indigenous people and the demands of settlers, and typically taking the side of the settlers, that kind of thing. But that requires specialized training. And when they show up, most of them also, they see it as this job I got to do, and then after my term is up, I'm going to head back home. Okay, going back to France, going back to Germany, going back to England, whatever it may be. All right. You'd also have people who are coming in for the economic aspect of this, people who have have expertise and training when it comes to the running of establishing a farm or a plantation, the running of a farm plantation. So that you have profitability coming out of that as soon as possible. And so people who have specialized expertise in those areas are also going to be sent. And sometimes again, in that idea of being a little bit more temporary. Technical experts, those could be people who might be like civil engineers who are coming to help lay down roads or train track or building bridges, things that are going to help with the infrastructure of a colony. So it's easier to get those natural resources that are being extracted, to get them out of the colony and to the closest port so they can be loaded up and sent back home. Those kinds of things. And so people who have that specialized training in those areas likewise are going to be sent to colonies, right? So you got like this whole little army of settlers who are coming in who all have these very, very specific roles in helping to make the colony successful for the imperializing country. All right. Okay. Effects of migration. Let's see, we're catching up all the words to the pictures. All right. Demographic changes. When we talk about demographics, we're kind of getting into populations and statistics that we can kind of connect with all of that. What we're going to see during this era of imperialism is going to be some really dramatic demographic changes that happen more often than not in the imperialized countries, in the colonies themselves. One of the first ones that jumps out at me is that a lot of the migrants we're talking about, even a lot of like the settlers that I'm talking about up here, A through D, many of them, I mean, if we were looking at gender numbers and doing some stats on that, we're going to find there are far more men that are on the move during this time frame than women. Not going to say that there aren't any women, there are, but many more times than not, it's going to be men. A lot of times it's men who are going, seeking those opportunities with the idea that, they're going to send money back home. Their families are going to stay. Maybe if things kind of change over time, the man will come back home, hopefully pockets filled with money, or maybe the family will join them later on. But typically it's the man who's going there to kind of get things off the ground, okay? With a lot of those male, a lot of men heading out, the kind of almost accidental result of that is that you're going to have a lot of those roles back home that are being vacated by men, and women are going to have to step in to take them. And so we can look at this time period as yet another kind of example of women, again, slowly but surely finding more opportunity and more advancement. Okay, they're basically able to empower themselves, because when the men leave, but there's still the jobs to be done, then the women are going to step in. They're going to take care of it. They're going to make sure it gets done. So continuing on what we kind of talked about in Unit 5 in terms of, baby steps all the time, but more positive changes for women. Okay. And then when we talk about migrant and cultural change, some of you, this will feel a little AP huggy where we're kind of going here. But, when new people arrive, whether it's Chinese, whether it's Irish, Italians, when they arrive, it's kind of a two-way street. They are going to assimilate. They're going to absorb the culture of, whether they are landing in Argentina or landing in, New York City. There's no way, it can't be helped, that they're going to absorb that Argentine culture, that American culture. But it's going to go the other direction as well. They're going to influence where they've landed. And they're bringing their foods, they're bringing their traditions, that kind of thing. They don't leave them, when they step off the ship. They bring them with them, and so you see that cultural change going in both directions in these colonies, and then countries that other countries that end up being destination points for a lot of these migrant moves that are going on. Okay. When we talk about the receiving societies, what I mean by that is where the migrants are going. Okay. The countries, the colonies that they are immigrating to, those are the receiving societies, that they're receiving all these new immigrants. And so talk about some of the effects specifically that happen there. Those of you from AP Hug, this term you should remember, okay? Ethnic enclaves. That's no problem if you didn't have AP Hub. What an ethnic enclave is basically when people of a similar culture cluster themselves together. Okay, a lot of times they do this kind of for security. Sometimes it's for familiarity. Sometimes it is for kind of like protecting each other. So when the Irish show up, when the Chinese show up, they kind of stick with each other. And a lot of times within a town or a community or a city, they're going to find one little part of that town, that community, that city, and they're all going to settle there together. And what we call that little settlement is an enclave. Okay, and it gives them a little bit of almost like a security blanket for them to then start that process of assimilating into this new culture and this new society that they've moved into. And we see these pop up all over the place. The picture you have over on the left, I think it's from San Francisco, where what they used to call Chinatown, is kind of what remains from a large Chinese enclave. There's one of these up in Seattle. Nowadays they call it the International District, but what it is a remnant is of these enclaves that when we had a lot of especially Chinese, but some other Asian, Japanese as well, here in the Pacific Northwest. And they created their little enclaves. Okay, so what do I have here? Some examples, some specific examples for you. Does you need the specific examples for the Chinese, Southeast Asia, and then again for the fourth time, here in the Americas. Okay, you're gonna have Chinese enclaves. But what's only that one slide that my pictures? Oh well, I need to go back and fix it. India, their immigrants, a lot of those laborers going to different places. They set up their enclaves in places like South Africa, Southeast Asia, South Africa. By the way, enclave where Gandhi ended up living in one of those enclaves when he was practicing law in South Africa before he went back to India, joined the Indian National Congress, and started that whole, his role in the independence movement there. All right, and then getting down here to the end of what we're going to cover. Irish enclaves in the United States, you can still go to, South Boston. What they call Southie is still overwhelmingly Irish families, now, 7th, 8th, 9th generation Irish families. Going back there, you also find smaller Irish enclaves in places like New York City and so on and so forth. And then we'll see the same thing. I mentioned the Italians. Argentina, you go to Argentina even today, 55% of the Argentinian population is of Italian descent. 55%. Okay, there's fewer people who can trace their lineage back to indigenous Argentinian people. That is how the influence that the Italians have. And then likewise, huge Italian enclaves in New York City. I think they have one also in Boston. I remember getting some really great Italian food, I believe, in Little Italy. That's right, Little Italy in Boston. So, a lot of those big cities on the East Coast end up being enclave cities, and featuring a lot of those. All right. And then, yes, I'm going to end you on a kind of a sour note, because there is backlash a lot of times to these new immigrants who are coming into either colonies or countries. More often than not, this is not a colonial thing, because again, the colonies are a little bit more controlled by their imperializers. And if this kind of issue was going to have any impact on the profitability of a colony, they're just not going to take that chance. This is more when we see some of these laborers and immigrants coming into countries like the United States, or maybe going into Australia, things like that. Okay, but when we talk about nativist movements, this is when the people of a country kind of band together against new immigrants. It's one of those, sad kind of side stories of, I don't know, one of the downsides of human nature, whatever you want to call it. There's not many countries, I think, you can look around the world that can say, oh, we never had that happen. It seems to happen anywhere. When, people in a country see a lot of new faces showing up. They may be of a different skin color. They may practice different religions. They may, just be very different culturally. And people of that country that they're coming into sometimes start to get worried that they're going to change things. And out of that worry, you get these movements to try to either limit the impact of them, sometimes stop immigration altogether, that kind of a concept. The Chinese will be a group that feels this backlash and this nativism more than others. They will experience this in Australia. We had a lot of Chinese that end up immigrating to Australia. Eventually, Australia will pass what they call their Chinese Immigration Act. By 1901, the Australians are operating under what they call the White Australia policy, which pretty much brings most Chinese immigration to a grinding halt. That's going to be the way Australia runs it until the 1970s. Before they change. Here in the United States, you got the example up there on the slide, the Exclusion Act. The U.S. government completely shuts down all immigration coming from China. The first time our country had just said absolutely no to another country, and this is at a time when we still don't mind seeing Europeans come pouring into the country from other parts of the world, but we do have a problem with the Chinese, and we could get into a big long discussion about where does race come into that, but it is a reality, and the United States doesn't lift that law. I think it's until like the 1920s or 30s. I think it's in effect for about 40 or so years. Before the United States finally allows limited immigration. Okay, we'll see kind of another version of that happen with Japanese immigrants to the United States during World War II, but I think I'll mention that in Unit 7. All right. I think that is where I'm going to hit the brakes. 36. I didn't make it all the way to 40 minutes. Just really darn close. All right. Like I said, one last little section. We will cover this on Monday. It will not take long. And then we will be into a full-on prep mode to get ourselves ready for, like I said, what will be a quiz, not a test. A quiz over all this information. All right. I've talked enough. I'm going to let you go at that. All right. I'll see you guys around. Take care.